Okay. Shalom, everyone. Welcome. This is our first of two classes on the Haggadah. And, every year it's just amazing how many different insights there are and how many beautiful thoughts there are and different approaches. We are living, I think, in the golden age of the Haggadah. So many amazing Haggadot. I was actually giving a class last week at the JCC. We have a 4-part series on the Haggadah, and I wasn't supposed to teach, but one of the teachers was unable to make it, so I had to step in, and I taught a class which was based on looking at the section of the Haggadah of Shefoch Chamatcha al Hagoyim, which we say towards the end of the Seder. That's traditionally when many people open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi. Let's take a quick poll, just show of hands. Who opens the door for Eliyahu Hanavi during that part? Okay, so everyone who has their screen on does. Okay.
Is there another time to open it, or either you open it then or you don't open it?
No, there's some people open at the beginning when we say Kol Dichpin Yesei V'Yechol, right? That makes sense to open it then. We're inviting people, and some people don't open the door at all. But the reason I mention this is because I looked at 14th, 15th, and 16th century page of a Haggadah, an illuminated Haggadah, that depicted that paragraph differently. The pictures were very different. And it occurred to me that back in the day, those were the Haggadah commentaries of the day. The Haggadah commentaries of the day were the pictures, and you would learn to understand and look at the text through the picture, and you would understand what the artist thought about the text via the way the picture was drawn. Now it's different. Now, like I said, we are living in the golden age of the Haggadah, but we are living in the golden age of the Haggadah with essays and paragraphs and just an almost endless amount of commentary. So it's really great. Gabi has a minhag of buying me a new Haggadah every year for Pesach. So I don't know what it's going to be this year, but we'll see.
Has he bought the Malbim Haggadah yet?
I do not think I have the Malbim Haggadah.
I just heard this week fraud. It had nothing to do with Malbim, but it was good for sales.
Oh, excellent. All right, great. So let's start. I want to start with a question and get a conversation going before we look at some sources. A lot of the Haggadah is based on questions. We're most familiar with the 4 questions, the Manishtana, but if you think about it, there are lots of other questions. For example, we say, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem. Well, that's one of the questions, but the other questions, Pesach al Shuma, Matzah al Shuma, Maror al Shuma, right? Why do we eat why do we have the Karban Pesach? Why do we eat Matzah? Why do we eat Maror? Then, like I said, we have the 4 questions. And there are other times in the Haggadah where questions come up. And so that's my question about questions, right? Why are we so focused on questions in the Haggadah? And I have two things to say about this, which I think will be interesting conversation starters for the Seder. But I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Why such a focus on questions at the Seder? Just unmute yourself and go for it. If you
well, maybe it starts within the 4 children in the Chumash where they're asking questions there.
Right. So the Torah.
Right.
So the Torah gives us the 4 questions that are asked that we then turn into the questions of the four sons in the Haggadah. So we are mimicking, if you will, right? We're just picking up on the cue that the Haggadah gave us, and we continue with that process. Okay, excellent. Dalia.
I actually wonder, I think is building a little bit off of what David said and Rabbi Gilman, what you said, but there's something about a questioning posture that seems almost very childlike. It seems like it's like to excite, to like engage, it becomes a conversation, and it's not just you're passively accepting information, but you're a part of the dialogue. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of why all the questions.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense, considering that the mitzvah is to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim to our children. So doing it through questions and answers engages them, makes them feel part of the process. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has a beautiful paragraph about this in his Haggadah, which I did not bring here. If you have his Haggadah, you should check it out. He has an essay all about questions, and he talks about the difference between a inheritance, which something comes automatically, and something that one has to work for in order to make their own. And he says that Judaism, while we call it a morasha, really it's something we have to work for. And using questions and answers is the work, right? We ask questions, we try to answer them. We don't just, like you said, Dalia, we don't just accept passively. We're part of the process, and that makes it gives it much more staying power. I agree. That's great. Okay. Any other suggestions? Okay. So let's look at. First, I'll just mention something that I was thinking about today, and then subsequently I found in a number of different Haggadot, and that is questions are really a symbol of freedom. The slave doesn't have the right, or maybe even the ability, to ask why they have to do something, right? The example that I was given, if a slave is told, paint this wall, they don't say to their master, well, why this wall? Why not paint the other wall? We just painted this wall. This wall looks great. The other wall needs a paint job. It seems, right, or a slave is given something to eat. They don't have the right to say, why did you give me this to eat? I want something else to eat. So, but a free person, right, does have the ability to ask and the right to ask, and is even encouraged to ask questions. So it could be that the reason why we spend so much time focused on questions at the Seder is in order to express our freedom, which is one of the things we're supposed to do at the Seder. We do a lot of things to express our freedom, right? We lean to express our freedom. We drink wine to express a certain degree of freedom, or even royalty. And so we ask questions just because we're able to, as a way of expressing our freedom. So I think that's right. Slaves have no choice, and questions are when someone asks a question, right, it shows that they believe that they have a choice. So we change our posture. We become questioning people when at the Seder to express that. So that's one idea, which I think is really a nice thought. The next thought I want to share with you is from Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon. He has a 2-volume set. One is a really beautiful Perush on the commentary on the Haggadah. That's this one called Shirat Miriam. He has another volume which is all the halachot of the Seder: wine, matzah, maror, leaning, how much, when. Really a great source. But he talks about questions, and he gives a number of explanations. But then he says this. He says here, hope you can see my cursor. However, there might be another reason. It states in the Talmud, and it is the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, that if one does not have children, other adults ask the Seder leader the questions, and even Torah scholars ask one another. And even if a person is by himself, he must ask himself. That's a really interesting halacha. That no matter what situation we find ourselves in, we have to ask questions. The Seder has to be asked in a question and answer format. Even if one is alone, right? One has to ask themselves and presumably answer the questions at the Seder. Now, in our context, it makes sense a little bit because we have a Haggadah, we just read the Haggadah. But before the Haggadah was established, you still had to do this, presumably. We still had to go through the process of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim vis-a-vis questions and answers. So here it even heightens the importance of questions and answers by telling us that one has to do that even if there's no one else there, there's no children, there's not a soul there. For most of us, the thought of even having a Seder like that was completely far-fetched until 3 Pesachs ago, when many people, maybe we know them, had to have Seder alone. And this halacha became live, maybe, at least in mass for the first time in a long time for many people. So that's a good place just to pause at our Seders in a few weeks and just be grateful that we're not in that situation anymore. And be grateful that we get to ask these questions to other people at the Seder and have a conversation, have other people answer them, and not have to, follow this halacha in this most extreme way where we have to ask questions to ourselves. So that's just a bracha to recognize when we're sitting at a table surrounded by loved ones, which again was not the case for many of us just a few years ago. Okay, so now let's go back to the question. Why such a focus on questions to the point where a person has to ask them even if they're alone? So Rabbi Rimon answers beautifully. Because while the focus on asking questions emphasizes the need to arouse the curiosity of each individual, like Dahlia said, another aspect of the importance of asking questions is raised here. And he continues. Through the exodus from Egypt, God made a change in the world. Down here. A nation of slaves went free. On the Seder night, we obtained the power to change, the power to be changed. It's a really nice theme to think about in the Seder, right? The Seder as a night of transformation. We often think about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur as a night of transformation, but the Seder is a night of transformation. We are actually marking and celebrating one of the most, right, significant transformative moments in Jewish history, right? Yetziat Mitzrayim. We probably could count on our hands the moments in Jewish history that had this impact, right? Har Sinai, when we got the Torah, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the establishment of the State of Israel, right? There are not that many moments in our history where our very essence, the essence of what it meant to be a Jew, was put on a completely different trajectory. And this is one of them, right? So the Seder night is a night of incredible change. So then Rav Rimon expands that theme. Not only is it, and this is common in terms of how we often interpret Torah. So it was a moment of national transformation, but Rav Rimon beautifully suggests that we take the theme of national transformation and we use it to inspire personal transformation in ourselves. Every Jew must ask himself on the Seder night, how is this night different from all other nights? What was so special in the exodus of the nation of Israel to freedom? And how did this change the nation of Israel and the entire world? Okay, that's a good question. What unique inner qualities am I able to unleash? How can I succeed to emerge differently from the Seder night, taller, more spiritual, with a soul that is freed and is not enslaved to any external cravings? We're going to come back to that, not being enslaved by external cravings, but I really was taken by this idea that that the notion of questions is also a notion of the ability to look at the world differently. That's what a question is. We look at the world differently than the way it's presented to us. It's a question is a transformative vehicle. It's a vehicle of transformation. And so what are our opportunities, right, for change, for increase, or all the things that Rav Rimon notes? How can I change my body so that it will be channeled into obeying God's wishes? How can I change my surroundings and even get the entire world to change and make it better with a cleaner and more pure reality? We ask, what makes this night different from all other nights? We examine the powers granted to us on this night, the power to change and the power to be changed, and attempt to clarify to ourselves what makes this night different. What is the change that will lead to our souls to freedom? So here Rav Rimon is not only focusing on the theme of change in general, of the theme of questions in general, he's focused on one particular question. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, which is really, according to some, it's all one question with just 4 different examples of that question, right? But that's not for our topic today. But this notion of difference, of the Seder is a difference maker, right? Yetziat Mitzrayim was a difference maker. The Seder is a difference maker. And how do we take that energy of the Seder and allow it to reflect into the rest of the year? Rabbi Rimon continues, to ask questions means not to accept the situation as it is. The ability to ask, clarify, and delve into topics also brings about the ability to change. A person who asks in utter sincerity in order to receive a true answer opens himself up to change. Right. So this is really interesting. Right? When we ask a question, we're not only exercising our freedom, but we are also, if we're asking the question honestly, we're also announcing that I'm willing to accept an answer which may be different than what I expected, which may be different than the answer that I knew or that I thought I knew to the question, right? Rabbi Rimon writes, he asks with the aim of absorbing, with the aim of ascending and changing. And I really like this language, the not to accept the situation as it is, right? It's a great question to ask around the Seder table. As we're talking about questions, right? What in the world exists that you can't accept, right? If this Seder, this night is about redemption, it's about our historical redemption, it's about our personal redemption, and it's also about how we want to redeem the world, what parts of the world we feel need redemption, and what we're going to do about it. It's a great opportunity to, I would say, lightly challenge people around the table to really take seriously this question of ma nishtana, not in the context of what is different, but what am I going to change in the days, years to come, keeping in the theme of Yetziat Mitzrayim being transformative. So just talking about questions is such fertile ground at the Seder. All right, I'm going to stop there before I move on to the next piece about questions, and see if anyone has any comments or thoughts about what we've said, or any other ideas about questions. Let's see. David, I see your hand up.
That was me.
Okay. And then we'll get Dalia next.
So I really appreciate what you're teaching. I think this is really such an interesting hinge, this question of why questions. And I guess, as a psychologist, and I'm not a developmental psychologist, although we do have a pediatrician in the room. So I'd be interested to hear what Noah thinks about this. But I think of questions as reflecting 2 things, both of which I think kids tend to be better at than adults. One is like being really curious, right? And the other is seeing something as if for the first time, kind of seeing something with fresh eyes. So yes, it's seeing things, quote, differently, as you were saying, but I think it's seeing things differently in very specific ways often. And I think in a way, there's a kind of wonder to questions. Like wonder is kind of the affect that goes with questions. And I think that wonderment is connected to awe. And I think these are very spiritual emotions that we don't cultivate much in adult life.
Yeah.
So, and I think that children are often better at expressing awe and wonder and curiosity and kind of seeing things with new eyes. And so in a way, it's asking us to return to our own beginnings and kind of
Great.
refresh our mind.
I love that add-on. I think that's great. That questions are right, because we're looking at the same world at the Seder night. We're looking at the same world that we were looking at an hour ago, but hopefully we're looking at it differently, which then leads us to ask a question. That's beautiful. And at the end there, you were channeling your inner Heschel by talking about wonder and awe.
I do
Same
love Heschel,
sentence.
and as a lover of nature, I really
Yeah.
buy that wonder and awe are some of the principal emotions that go with spiritual experience.
Yeah, and the natural curiosity is great. It's great. Yes. So just another direction to take this at our Seder about why questions are important and why they're really connected to redemption and to freedom. Because again, the part of the reason why Moshe told God they're not going to listen to me is because he didn't believe that they could look at the world and imagine something different. Right? Someone said this to me just the other day, right? That it was in my I have a program at the J that I run on social action for teens, and we had a speaker the other day, and the speaker said, you can't dream about something that you can't imagine. So until there was, or hopefully will be, a female African-American Supreme Court justice, it was really hard for people to think that they could be that, right? So that's what Moshe was saying to God. They're not going to talk to me about freedom. They're too busy making bricks. They can't look past what's right in front of them. So that's so great, right? In terms of, that's what a question is. It breaks through that armor and shows that we're maybe seeing the possibility of something different. So that's awesome. Thank you. Dalia.
Thank you. So first of all, Joanna, your comments reminded me, I don't know if everybody here saw it, but a little while ago, maybe a year ago, there was an amazing article, I think it was in the Washington Post, although maybe I'm wrong, about the power of awe and how being able to feel awe is one of like the primary ways you can enhance your life. So just your comments about feeling awe and being inspired by nature was just really reminded me of that article. And if you haven't seen it, I can try and find it and send it to you. But my question is, so I really appreciate all of the delving into, the power of asking questions and getting clarity and being able to open yourself up. But one of the things that I grapple with on Pesach at the Seder in particular is that a lot of the questions that we ask as kind of part of the formula of the Haggadah, the way that they're answered on Pesach doesn't seem intuitive to me. It's like we're asking Manishtana and then we answer with like Halach Ma'anya, and I accept it because I feel like that's part of how we canonize the Haggadah, but I never really understood those things as answers. And so I'm curious if the thrust of this is the value just in asking the question and just like grappling in general, even if you can't find an answer, or even if maybe the answers in front of you aren't satisfactory to you, like, is that also part of the value that is kind of trying to be illuminated here?
So that's a great question. It really goes into the value, of the Haggadah itself. So the Haggadah is both an incredible tool, but as you're alluding to, sometimes not so great, I guess. We're recording this, so I'm trying to choose my words carefully. Right? Because if we're so focused on getting through the Haggadah, and maybe next week we'll talk about what is skippable in the Haggadah, because then you feel, right, Dalia, that you can't really answer the question the way you want to answer the question because you want to get to the answer that the Haggadah gives. So I think that I think my answer is my feeling is that I think there's value in both, and And that's why it's really important to think about the Seder ahead of time and think about who's at the table, what age they are. I remember when my kids were growing up. Now it's a little different. I had some teenagers at the table and toddlers at the table, and I almost felt like I was running 2 or 3 different Seders. I would spend a few minutes talking to the toddlers, and then a few minutes talking to the tweens, and a few minutes talking to the teens, because there's a different v'higadat halabincha element, right? There's a different tell your children element, whether if they're 4 or if they're 15. So that's why it's helpful to think about this in advance. And this is not for now. There are certain elements that we need to do at the Haggadah to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, but it's not all of the Haggadah, and it doesn't necessarily, and so it leaves us room to meander a little bit. I hope that's a helpful.
Yeah, no, it was very helpful, and I think you've hooked me for next week's share also.
Excellent. I was thinking about what to talk about, and you just that gave me an idea. So I think that there's definitely value in asking the questions, regardless of what the answers are, even as we have to get to some elements of the. I'll tell you that our family tradition has always been the first night we sort of stick with the Haggadah, and the second night we're much more freestyle, making sure that we get the elements of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim in. So maybe that's for next week. Okay. David or Joanna, you have a hand up again or still?
No, I didn't mean to raise the hand.
Okay, great. So let's, if everyone's okay, we can move on to the next section. This is a selection from the Haggadah of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. He's known as the Sri Dayesh. He's more well known for his Shelot Utshuvot, for his responsa. But he has a beautiful Haggadah, and a few years ago, it was translated into English. And he has a really interesting take on questions at the Haggadah as well, similar to our Rimon, but actually really gives us a challenge. And it's in the context of Dayeinu. He sees Dayeinu in a similar way to the way Rav Rimon saw the notion of questions and answers. He doesn't see Dayeinu as simply a list of things that we're grateful for, because the words then that term Dayeinu, it would have been enough, doesn't make sense. So this is the famous question on Dayeinu. What does that mean? But had God taken us out of Egypt, but not that would have been enough? Had he not given us food in the desert, that would have been okay? It doesn't seem like that would have been okay. We would have all died, right? So what does Dayeinu mean? That it would have been enough had God only done one step and not the next step. Almost every Haggadah, every Haggadah's commentary on Dayeinu is based on that question. So the Sri Dayesh, Rav Weinberg, and his Haggadah is interesting. He has there are a couple of different things that he wrote and things that his students wrote, but he writes as follows. This is his part right here on the left. Each step of Dayeinu adds to and renews the Jew's awareness of himself. As we learned from the teaching of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, of blessed memory, a person's soul is composed of layers, layers upon layers. The topmost, second, third, and man's task. Topmost, second, third, and man's task in this world is to reveal bit by bit the layers that make up his being. And when he talks specifically about how this works in the context of Dayeinu, up here he says, it would have been enough for us, Dayeinu. Each step in Dayeinu, from Yetziat Mitzrayim to building the Beit HaMikdash, is part of Am Yisrael's spiritual journey. Parallel to this, each step reveals another layer of the individual Jew's soul and raises him from the level of a servant in Egypt to the highest level, the meeting with God in the Mikdash. So I thought this is such a neat challenge, right? To go through, and he does it. He goes through each step of Dayeinu and discusses how each one is a part of a spiritual journey. And maybe we'll look at one or two, but would be an interesting conversation at the Seder. Maybe you don't want to go through all 15 of them. I think it's 15, because that's going to take a long time. But again, you want to meander, by all means. But it's a really interesting approach that Dayeinu is about a spiritual journey, whether a personal spiritual journey or a national spiritual journey. And I just want to share something which is so beautifully honest by Rav Yisrael Salanter when it talks about how a person is complex. This is not necessarily a Pesach teaching per se. It's just a beautiful piece of Torah and a beautiful piece of the way Torah could understand the human being. And it's connected to this notion of Dayeinu that were layers, and each line of Dayeinu is another layer. So he writes as follows. He talks, based on this, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would explain two well-known sayings about Avraham at the binding of Yitzchak. Tears were welling up and flowing from Avraham's eyes until his entire body was floating in tears. And despite this, the heart was happy to do the will of the Creator. And so Rav Weinberg goes on to say, isn't it interesting that Avram was complex? Now, I don't want to gloss over the whole question of the Akedah at all, and how difficult of a story it is to understand. But Rav Yisrael Salanter does is he takes these two midrashim, and he doesn't say, well, one midrash views Avraham as being completely gung-ho, doing what God wanted him to do. And another midrash depicts Avraham as being sad that his son is going to die. He says, no, it's the same Avraham. It's the same Avraham that wanted to do God's will was also sad about what that was going to mean. And he was ambivalent. And he was full of doubt. And I like that because I like to unearth these Torahs that paint the biblical characters in this honest way. And I like to see when Chazal also, when Chazal does that. And it's connected to Dayeinu because Rav Weinberg sees each step of Dayeinu as a different element of who we are. And so the upshot of that is Dayeinu is alluding to how complex the Jewish people are and Jewish people are. And it's interesting to maybe look at the Dayeinu and ask people which element speaks to you, which elements, what type of spiritual growth do you see in a particular element? I'll share with you one of my favorites. This is one of my favorites, where it says, "Ilu haraget bichorehem, v'lo natan lanu et mamonam Dayeinu." Right? If he had slain their firstborn and not bestowed their wealth on us. So here, Rav Weinberg writes, by the way, if you're wondering what that highlight is, I discovered during the pandemic these we all have the sticky things that we put in our books, but these are highlighters. So you don't have to use a marker. So it doesn't ruin your book, and it's great for Shabbos. You want to highlight something. So another COVID keeper. Okay. So here's what he says. He killed their firstborn. The Meshech Chachma points out that it is the firstborn that makes a man a father. It is the role of Israel as my firstborn to publicize God's name in the world. In other words, to turn the God of the heaven into the God of the land. That may be my favorite two sentences in this whole Haggadah, right? Our job on earth is to make a Kiddush Hashem. Our job on earth is to sanctify God's name, right? People know that we're Jewish by our names, by our affiliation, by the dinners we ask them to join us at. they just know, right? And our job is to be God's firstborn. And this beautiful line, to make the God of heaven into the God of the land, right? To show people that godliness is alive and well, and all the positive things that people ascribe to godliness is alive and well, and they see it in us, right? By the way, we say this every day in Kedusha, Nikadesh et Shimcha ba'olam, Kishem shemakdishim oto b'shmei marom. That's our job, to sanctify God's name here on earth, the way that the angels sanctify God's name in the heavens. So that's what Rav Weinberg means by looking at each one of these sentences as an element of spiritual growth, or one of our layers, right? So I really like this. I think it, in my mind, maybe it doesn't connect for you, but in my mind, it connected very well to Rav Rimon, in the sense that Rav Rimon's notion that questions are about our ability to change and view ourselves and the world differently. And that's what Dayeinu is also. It's about uncovering who we really are by trying to analyze the different stages, the different steps of Dayeinu. Let me stop there and see if there are any comments or questions on this idea. Okay. Raise your hand if you sing Dayeinu at your Seder. Traditional Dayeinu, yeah? Or anyone's using, that's never going to go away. Okay. Okay. That is Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. You see, I highlighted a bunch of them. If you're interested, by the way, I'm happy to send you this little PowerPoint presentation. It's a PDF, and you could read the parts that I highlighted. If you're interested, there was one other one which I thought I would. Yeah, this one was nice. That God supplied us with food for 40 years. So here, Rav Weinberg goes on to talk about the importance of consistency, right? Of when we take on something, to do it, right? And God did it for 40 years. Every day the man came without missing. Every day the Be'er Miriam was right where we thought it was going to be. Every day the cloud of glory protected us from the sun, and the fire showed us the direction in the night. So that's a nice spiritual idea, in the sense that we maybe the Seder night is the night that we transform ourselves, in that our religious and spiritual commitments become more solid, right? And we do them on a more consistent basis. And also any other type of commitment, that we have. We think about it in terms of consistency. And here, this dovetails well with the idea of imitating God, right? The Gemara in a few places says we're supposed to mimic God. Mahu afata. Just as God is X, Y, and Z, so are we supposed to be X, Y, and Z. So God is consistent. At least he was consistent in the time of the Midbar, and so that's something that we ourselves can aspire to. So just a beauty. Again, it's just a beauty. And this is, I have a new phrase I've been thinking about recently. The Haggadah is not just for Pesach night. It just, these ideas stay with us, and so this is a really nice thing to think about throughout the course of Yom Tov. How the Dayeinu fits into our life, and how various elements of our life can be uncovered in the Dayeinu. Okay, one more idea for this week. This is from one of the many Haggadahs of Rabbi Soloveitchik, none of which he wrote, by the way. These are all Haggadot by his students, or they are collections of things he wrote about Yitziat Mitzrayim and freedom, etc., which were then culled together into Haggadot. This one was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Adler, and this is just an interesting understanding of the Hallel in the Haggadah. We're moving off of questions and now moving into the Hallel. And bonus points, by the way, if anyone, when they get to Hallel, is still having conversation, because by then people are hungry. So if you could have this conversation about Hallel, you're doing great. So Rabbi Soloveitchik notes a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, which paragraphs of Hallel should be part of the Magid, right? If you recall, we split Hallel into two parts. We have two paragraphs of Hallel at the end of Magid, and we have the rest of Hallel in the Hallel section of the Haggadah, right? We have Magid, then we eat. Safun Barech Hallel, right? So we have the Magid section, we have some Hallel in it, and then we have the Hallel section, we have some Hallel in it. So there's a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, which parts, how it should be broken up. So Beit Shammai says that one should only say the first paragraph, up until Eim Habanim Samecha. Right? Beit Shammai says that one recites only the first chapter, up to Eim Habanim, and begins Hallel after Birkat HaMazon with B'tzeit Yisrael. Hillel says that before the meal, one recites the first two paragraphs, Hallel Avdei Hashem and B'tzeit Yom Mitzrayim, and begin Lo Lanu after Birkat HaMazon. Now we follow Hillel, but Rabbi Soloveitchik does, he begins now to understand what they're arguing about, and there's a beautiful lesson at the end. Shammai believes that since the fourth of the four cups is drunk over the Hallel, one should at least describe Yitziat Mitzrayim during the cup, right? So if we say B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim, when the Jews left Mitzrayim in the Magid section, by the time we get to Hallel, there's nothing left in there about Egypt, about leaving Egypt. So the fourth cup of wine we're drinking with no connection at all to Yitziat Mitzrayim. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik says, well, that's why Beit Shammai says, let's keep B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim for the end of the Seder. Okay? One should at least describe Yitziat Mitzrayim during the cup devoted to Hallel, in order to satisfy the obligation of the Ficha Chayv Lahodot, which is recited prior to the meal. One paragraph suffices. And you just leave the first paragraph of Hallel in the Magid section as the element of praising God. Hillel has a different view. Hillel believes that if we are already saying now before the meal that we are obligated to praise God, then we also have to praise God for what we're praising God for. We can't just praise God in vague terms. We have to say we're praising God because God took us out of Egypt, which is why the paragraph of B'tzeit Yisrael Mitzrayim must be in Magid, because the Magid section requires us to praise God, and we have to praise God specifically for Egypt, for leaving Egypt. So that's what they are arguing about. And he says, and Hillel goes on to say, and this is the second point, the Hallel at the end of the Seder is no longer about Yitziat Mitzrayim, it's about the future. The Hallel that we recite after Birkat HaMazon is not necessarily devoted to Yitziat Mitzrayim, but rather offers thanksgiving for everything else that God does on our behalf, and for that which he will do in the future, particularly the future redemption. That's just an interesting insight into how the Haggadah works. According to Hillel, the first part of the Haggadah, Magid, is all about Yitziat Mitzrayim. The second part of the davening, let's say, of the Haggadah, which is the Hallel part, that's no longer about Yitziat Mitzrayim. We're done with Yitziat Mitzrayim by then. And now we're praising God for other things in our life. So again, good time to pause at the Seder and say, this is how Rabbi Soloveitchik conceptualizes what we're about to do. What are we thankful for in our life outside of the fact that we're not slaves, because we took care of that in Magid, right? And then Rabbi Soloveitchik notes that this would not be the first time that we have a major focus on something and then branch off to focus and thanking God for other things. For example, Birkat Hamazon discharges the obligation to thank God for our food, but then we add the fourth bracha, Birkat Hamazon, which is a general expression of thanks for all the good he has done for us. Similarly, during Birkat HaGomel, the one reciting the blessing says, HaGomel l'chayvim tovot shegemalani kol tov, rather than shegemalani tov zeh. Right? It's all of the good things. When we say Birkat HaGomel, we thank God for all of the good things in our life, not just for the fact that I was, thank God, not hurt in that car accident. We thank God for all the good things. One who is ill, recovered, thanks God for everything that he has done in addition to the recovery from illness. So too, the Gemara in Brachot says, in the name of Ravina, that if a miracle occurred to one in two separate locations, then whenever one chances upon either location, one should thank God for the miracles that took place in both places. So this is a really beautiful idea in the sense that at the beginning of the Seder, we're focused on Yetziat Mitzrayim. But then at the end, according to Rav Soloveitchik, we start to thank God for all manner of things. The future Mashiach, stuff that's good now. So that's, a neat way to conceptually understand the Haggadah, but it's also a beautiful lesson, right? In the sense that it's reminding us that when we're thankful, like when we are actually feeling thankful for things, we really should pause and think about all the other things that we're thankful for, right? Because we don't want to turn thanking God into a what have you done for me lately exercise. And I'm only thankful for God for this thing right now. That's really important, but it leaves out all of the other things. So even at the Seder, and this is I think the salient point, even at the Seder, we're so focused on one mitzvah, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the maror and the wine and the matzah, all those other things are props in our ability to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're so focused on that, but at the end, we leave room for other things. We leave room to be grateful for other things. And I think that's a really beautiful lesson in terms of just being an expansive person and being able to see beyond what's right in front of us, to be grateful for what may not yet even be there and what is behind us and what is out of our range of sight right at that moment. So that's a really nice idea. So those are the ideas for tonight. The power of questions, Dayeinu as a way to uncover layers of who we are spiritually and nationally, and the notion of the split Hallel, and the split as a way to remind us to look beyond the moment where we are, to be grateful for other things. Just crossed my mind, as much as it's going to be wonderful that we're going to have Seders with our loved ones. I'm sure not all of our loved ones are going to be at the Seder. We can't always get together, everyone. That's a moment to be grateful for those loved ones in our lives who are not at the Seder this year, because they're at a different Seder with other parts of the family, even though they're not right in front of us, and we're not going to thank them for the brisket and for the matzah farfel and for the tzimis, right? They should still be in our hearts and our minds at the Seder, and be grateful for all the bracha that they brought to our life. So those are a couple of thoughts for this session. Thank you so much for joining. And I see something in the chat. Okay. I want to, any comments or questions, last minute comments or questions by anyone? I know I owe Brian an answer.
This reminded me, first of all, this was terrific. I totally agree with Dahlia. This reminded me of something I read. There's a Haggadah by Rabbi David Silver, who founded Drisha, where he points out that there are actually 4 questions hidden in Hallel. In the second paragraph of Hallel, it says, Malach hayam kitanu hayarden yisov lechar.
There's a rabbi, this is an interesting name, a Rabbi Gesundheit, who wrote up an essay, and it's actually Rav Rimon recreated it. If you have his Haggadah, he recreated his Haggadah, that there are 4 Haggadahs in each Haggadah. Maybe I'll start with this next week, because it actually connects to why you can skip. Because we actually do all the 4 things that we have to do in the Haggadah 4 times. Questions, answers, praise. So maybe we'll look at that next week, because it's really incredible, another incredible way to conceptually understand the Haggadah, and then we'll go into other strategies for the Seder. So thank you all for your comments and your questions, and for those of you who are going to be around, I'm looking forward to seeing you all on Shabbos, and we'll be at Kohelet 9:30 a.m. Shabbos morning for all, and we'll do a little Shabbat Haggadol learning, but it won't be as long as a traditional Shabbat Haggadol drasha, so breathe easy. All right, have a good night, everybody. It's great to see you all.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.